jour.
I call this meeting to order. I'll speak slowly because I know there are members and witnesses who are in the room but not yet seated. Welcome to meeting number 41 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts of the House of Commons.
In hybrid format, pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed to the chairs, although witnesses will see when there's questions back and forth. You're kind of directing them back and forth to the members through me. I'd like to remind witnesses that committee members may either ask questions in French or English. And so if you do need interpretation, please take a moment to prepare your earpiece before a member begins, just so we don't lose any time during the rounds. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee is resuming its consideration of the Public Accounts of Canada 2024 and 2025, which were referred to the committee on Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, and Friday, November 7th, 2025.
All of our witnesses here. From the Department of Canadian Heritage, Francis Bilodeau, Deputy Minister, thank you for coming in with your team, along with Andrew Brown, Associate Deputy Minister, Joël Montminy, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs, and Véronique Côté, Chief Financial Officer. Thank you all for coming in. Mr. Bilodeau, you'll have a maximum of around 5 minutes. I tend to be lenient with the time because we want to make sure you have an opportunity to present yourself. So over to you, please.
Great. Well, first, thank you, Mr. Chair, for having us today. Je suis très heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui pour supporter.
I'm very pleased to be here today to support your important work. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin.
I'm joined with colleagues from Heritage, and we're pleased to support the committee in its review of the department's public accounts for 23-24 and 24-25. Les comptes publics, comme vous le savez, constituent un élément essentiel.
The public accounts are an essential component of parliamentary oversight. They provide a transparent and comprehensive account of how public funds were used over the previous fiscal year, and they reflect our collective responsibility to ensure sound stewardship, accountability, and results for Canadians. Canadian Heritage plays a vital role in the cultural, civic, and economic life of Canada. Through our programs and policies, we foster an environment in which Canadians can experience dynamic cultural expression, celebrate our history, and build strong, inclusive communities.
Invests in the future and builds a strong sense of Canadian identity and unity by supporting the things that define who we are as Canadians. Our official and Indigenous languages, the arts and culture, the sports systems and our athletes, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and important heritage commemorations and celebrations. Les comptes publics présentent les autorisations.
The public accounts reflect the department's actual spending authorities and expenditures for the fiscal year. As outlined in our 2023-24 and 2024-25 departmental results report, departmental spending is largely delivered through grants and contributions programs, which represent the majority of our expenditures and support individuals, organizations, and communities across the country. From a yearly budget of approximately $2.1 billion, spending of $1.9 billion, or 90%, is issued as grants or contributions. Year after year, Canadian Heritage maintains its focus on achieving results for Canadians, guided by a strong commitment to transparency, sound financial management, and continuous improvement. Under our core responsibility for official languages, the department under our core responsibility for creativity, arts, and culture, we continue to support creators, cultural workers, and industries in adapting to a rapidly evolving digital landscape. Funding helped foster the production and discoverability of Canadian content and supported a diverse and innovative cultural sector that contributes to both economic resilience and cultural sovereignty.
Area of sport, departmental programs supported participation and excellence from grassroots to high-performance levels. Investments also contributed to safer and more inclusive sports environments, aligning our commitments to integrity and well-being in sport. Par l'entremise de nos activités liées à la...
Through our work on diversity and inclusion, the department supported communities facing systemic barriers, racism, and discrimination. These investments helped advance equity and inclusion while strengthening social cohesion across Canada. Finally, under our Heritage and Celebrations mandate, Canadian Heritage supported opportunities for Canadians to connect with their history, participate in national events, and celebrate shared values and identities.
The results reports highlights that across these areas, programs are designed to achieve measurable outcomes, supported by clear performance indicators. This ensures that funding is not only spent responsibly, but also contributes to tangible results for Canadians. With respect to financial management, Canadian Heritage continues to operate within a strong framework of internal controls, risks, and oversight. The department works closely with central agencies to ensure full compliance with financial policies and reporting requirements. Comme l'indique les comptes publics,
as reflected in the public accounts, variances between planned and actual spending can occur for a number of reasons, and I'm sure the committee is aware of this, including the timing of program uptake, the sunsetting or renewal of temporary funding, and evolving priorities. These variances are analyzed and reported transparently through our public reporting instruments, including the Departmental Results Report. Importantly, the department is committed to continuous improvement in both financial reporting and program delivery. We regularly review our practices to strengthen efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability.
Heritage remains committed to the prudent management of public funds and delivering results that matter to Canadians. We will continue to ensure that our investment supports strong, inclusive, and dynamic Canada, one that reflects the diversity of its people, promotes shared sense of belonging. Again, we thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of this committee for the opportunity to be here today, and we will make every effort to answer your questions to the best of our capacity.
Alors, pour commencer, c'est M. Deltel.
To begin, Mr. Deltel, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Have a good start to your week. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our parliamentary committee. Mr. Bilodeau, is it true that the federal government launched an investigation into the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages? My colleague Andrew is leading that file. There were reports in the newspaper today about the evaluation we're conducting. Mr. Brown can discuss this. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And, of course, as we saw in the media over the weekend, it's true that we launched a special investigation into the accounts of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. And this is following allegations, anonymous allegations, that we've received at the department. So that is why we started this review, to find additional information. There's a conference that cost $10 million. It was a 4-day conference in Ottawa on Indigenous languages. Thank you once again for the question. This is concerning a conference last year here in Ottawa, WAVES, which was held by the Indigenous Languages Commissioner. So, like all expenses of their office, it will be subject to this review. $10 million for a 4-day conference. Do you think that's money that's well invested? As mentioned in the media, it's a lot of money. That being said, did you authorize it? So, did you authorize it? Yes or no? We did.
Is an independent organization that acts at arm's length from the Government of Canada.
Donc vous le saviez pas.
So you didn't know about it?
En coproduction.
So it was a co-production with Indigenous people. Did you know it was going to cost $10 million for 4 days? Yes or no? I didn't have a report specifically before the conference. I don't know if Mr. Brown did. We knew that they were going ahead with a major conference, and they received for funds last year to support the office in their activities for the year in total. It's okay, but I want to know, did you authorize $10 million for a 4-day conference for Indigenous languages? That question in particular, I would say no. So what are you doing in life aside from ensuring that taxpayer money is well spent? This is $10 million. How many Indigenous people could have learned their language with $10 million? How many? The process put in place with the Commission, the authorities are responsible for management, and the Commissioner is named by order in council. How many Indigenous people could have taken lessons with $10 million? I don't have those numbers available. How many hundreds or thousands of Indigenous people would have had access to knowledge of their mother tongue, which they haven't had, and they want to learn? The people in my riding in Wendake, the Wendat, it's a dead language which is coming back to life. With $10 million, how many First Nations could have learned their language rather than have a 4-day conference? Once again, the process for which we are responsible is giving money to the organization. $10 million? Well, the amounts would be for the general funding of the organization. There's accountability to their organization was co-created with Indigenous people. You don't do any follow-up, you just give $10 million and that's it. Every year, there is a report, an annual report, submitted by the Commissioner to the Minister and Parliament. So they show how they spent. Okay, fine. But you authorized $10 million for an organization. You close your eyes and then you find out that it cost $10 million for a 4-day conference. You're not even able to tell me how many First Nations could have learned their language with $10 million. What I would say is that it's not only through that office that money is spent to support the revitalization of Indigenous languages. This is a part of our investments. When we speak of the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, in particular, it was the creation by Parliament expressly that it be an organization at arm's length from the federal government. Well, the $10 million comes from Canadian taxpayers, and you are accountable to them. So don't evade this. It's your responsibility. $10 million. Taxpayer money. Do you think that was money that was well managed? Well, once again, that's the reason we have undertaken this special investigation at the request of the federal government after the fact. Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
So the federal government highlight you. You didn't take the initiative of that. Did you? Did you take the initiative?
Dès qu'on a entendu, on a reçu des...
As soon as we received anonymous allegations, we launched a process to obtain more information. Okay, a last point. By design, there's a process to create an organization that was to be co-managed with Indigenous people in the view of reconciliation, and the decision to have a conference was to be co-created with some independence from the government. We didn't set out to define the priorities of Indigenous people. It was a co-creation approach, which is generally aligned with the federal government's approach. Okay, thank you. Next.
You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I appreciate your contributions and your input. I want to talk about different ethnic communities. So my riding has probably the second largest Persian community in at least British Columbia, maybe even in Canada. I was wondering what programs, what funding might be available to support the Persian community in our community, and also considering there's a great deal of anxiety regarding what's going on in Iran today, whether there's whether you have a role to play in helping them get through that.
Yeah, and I guess maybe going back, and I will ask Mr. Brown to add in after. Since 2024, the government has had an anti-racism strategy, which is put in place, which is supported by programs and funding, as well as with the recently announced Advisory Council on Rights, Inclusion, and Equality. And through the anti-racism strategy, the government is taking a series of actions, including direct supports for community organizations. Mr. Brown actually oversees a number of those programs, so I'll ask him to add in.
Sure. Thank you, Francis, and thank you for the question. I think it will, of course, depend on the nature of the support that they're looking for. But I think speaking to some of the programming that we have with Canadian Heritage, I do think about our programs under essentially the multiculturalism and anti-racism banner that the Deputy Minister has just mentioned. Under that, we have a couple of different streams. One that we refer to as the events stream, and this allows community organizations across the country to apply for funding to support the hosting of events that advance specifically the multicultural character of the country. And so it is both about celebrating but also bringing people together and celebrating Canada's multiculturalism. As was mentioned already, we have programs as well that are about tackling discrimination and racism across the country. And these are also programs that many community organizations have embraced to support themselves, support their communities, and drive belonging across the country. So that would be just a couple that I would mention with respect to the multiculturalism program.
Well, thank you. I frankly hadn't thought about the racism aspect of it. I appreciate that that's important. I was considering thinking more in terms of positive things to support the Persian culture and the recognition of their history and their contributions to world history and so forth. I think you spoke to that to some degree in terms of multiculturalism. Is there any more that you can add to that? How can we support them in a positive way to embrace their Persian culture in our society?
We do have programs, including programs that intend to build capacity in minority communities, as well as programs that will, for example, support festival and events that encourage the celebration of the diversity within Canada. Andrew, these are yours.
Yeah, I think just as you said, and so we would encourage communities to look for opportunities to apply for some of our funding. I think that we have seen in recent years a greater recognition of specific celebrations that are important to communities around the world. I think about celebrations of Nowruz when thinking about Persian communities. And so, I do think there are opportunities. It is particularly the multiculturalism program and its various components that seem like they might be appropriate when it relates to celebration of Persian culture in particular. And so those are for events, as mentioned already, as well as capacity building. And this is a program that helps community organizations in terms of their own capacity with projects that they may wish to lead.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'll segue over to Mr. Deltel's question regarding Indigenous languages. Not precisely his question. We have the Coquitlam First Nation in my writing. It has a Hanikwenalam language, and of course, I think with all indigenous languages, we have a concern about them dying out. Can you give us more information about what we can do to support our Indigenous community in advancing and enhancing their language, their native language skills?
And maybe the first point I'll add to that is since 2019, the government's actually made significant investments, and this goes beyond sort of the Commission of Indigenous Language, but in supporting Indigenous languages. Approximately $1.4 billion invested between 2019 and 2029. And those include supports for community-driven projects. And so through those funding, projects that are driven by the community, initiatives that are driven by the communities, there's been about 3,000 of them across the country. And so part of our programming directly supports those community-led programs through our investments.
That's absolutely correct, Deputy. Almost all of the programming, all of the funding, rather, that goes out to support the revitalization of Indigenous languages goes out to Indigenous partners who themselves are the ones who make the decisions in terms of how it should be invested to support the revitalization and the protection of their own Indigenous languages. And so that is ongoing work that we participate in each year with a joint implementation steering committee that recognizes the distinction basis to the revitalization of Indigenous languages. And so we've been working hard with them. There's a number of different strategies that have been developed, and that's each to a specific community. In many cases, where they're leveraging the abilities of Indigenous elders. Unfortunately, many of them are now getting to the end of their lives, and so there's a real urgency in terms of trying to gather that information right now, to use them in terms of teaching younger people the language, often looking at people perhaps we'll just say at the teaching age, so that they themselves may be able to teach youngsters, and in that way bring back their languages. So there's a number of different strategies. We put that in the hands of Indigenous peoples themselves. But what I should also say is that we have been, of course, following the path that was laid through the Indigenous Languages Act that was approved by Parliament in 2019. One of the pieces there is a review, an independent review of the Indigenous Languages Act. And that's something that the Minister has been proceeding on since this past fall. We're just about now at the point of contracting the specific individuals that will lead that independent review. And once that is underway, we can expect that within a period of perhaps about 18 months, that the lead reviewer will be reporting back with suggested changes that would continue to potential changes to the legislation, but essentially the changes the federal government should be making to better support the revitalization of Indigenous languages.
Thank you. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire, s'il vous plaît, pour...
Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At my request and with the support of a number of colleagues from each political party, the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDP, I asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer to look into the FIFA World Cup. The PBO revealed last week that public investments of $1 billion were given to FIFA, essentially $82 million per game. So 1 minute is worth about $1 billion, or it is $473 million because security can't be accounted yet. So the bill will only go up. And if there are more needs, it will be paid by the federal government. In addition, the exonerations, or the tax exemptions, when we look at Radio-Canada's reporting, in the contract, giving the keys to the country, there are secret agreements. Could we have details on the compensation provided to FIFA in terms of tax exemptions? Could you send to the committee the receipts, the amounts rather, that will be lost by the Treasury? So no taxes paid on for 10 years by FIFA. Is that the case? Matters of tax policy would be better answered by finance or Canada Revenue. That's not information we have. Our department's role was to support host cities through funding, to support them in ensuring the games once the government decided to host FIFA. That would be Mr. Brown's file. would he like to add something? As you've mentioned, that's correct. Concerning
customs and duties, FIFA was granted an exemption for goods that they would be importing into the country with respect to the FIFA World Cup tournament. This is the same approach that was used for the FIFA 2015 Women's World Cup, and it was specifically related to those goods that would essentially be expected to be brought in, have a temporary use, and then be leaving the country again subsequently.
Vous le nommez bien, pour un usage temporaire.
So this is temporary use. So $473 million from the federal government, Quebecers who rejected FIFA by saying that's what's required by this group that has a very poor reputation internationally. Quebecers rejected this because we said there shouldn't have been events at the same time. There couldn't have been the Grand Prix and the Just for Laughs Festival and the Jazz Festival and the Francophonie. That was the type of requirement. Fortunately, Quebec City and Montreal didn't go forward, but we still have to pay that bill, over $100 million of Quebecers' money going to FIFA to host these events. How did you evaluate the economic benefits for Quebecers, and how do you justify that expense for Quebec and Canadian taxpayers? It's nearly $1 million per minute of a game by different levels of government to have soccer games in Canada, in Ontario and BC. As you mentioned, that amount of money, it includes not only the investment by the federal government, but also by the other levels of government. We know that with the federal investment, it's really for the host cities so they can have what they need for operations. Second, there's an investment to support security at games in Toronto and Vancouver. And in the 2025 budget, there was something about not only security, but also to help the events leave a legacy for Canadians from coast to coast. Okay. In the budget, it was presented as an investment, which is absurd from an accounting point of view. The deficit should be much higher because it's not an investment, it's an expense. Money for security won't build infrastructure. It can't be amortized over a number of years. There were guarantees that needed to be made in the economic study. But when we see that the price of tickets is about $1,300 for bad seats, $3,000 for a game between, for example, Canada and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Destination Vancouver was saying there's a 20% drop in hotel reservations. So will this event be a flop? For how long will we have to pay for these bad decisions without knowing what contracts were made and why tax exemptions were granted? At what cost? We won't know. Why was that decision made? FIFA is one of the biggest sporting events in the world. The government decided to support it, and our department's role is to support host cities so they succeed. For the economic benefits, they're not yet measured, and we'll see them over time. At what price? That's the question.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Next.
Is Mr. Keurig, please, for 5 minutes.
Hello, thank you everybody for being here today. So I'd like to start off by asking, or yes or no, that the CBC gets around $1.4 billion, right? That's the budget for 2025.
Yep, that's
Yeah,
correct.
Thank you. Now, do you folks know how much the TV show Northland Tales got out of that $1.4 billion?
Not offhand, but we can get that information. Certainly.
Okay, so it's $2.5 to $5 million that they received. Now, my next question is going to be very direct. Do you think it's a misappropriation of funding that the Canadian taxpayer had to get their money taken, 2.5 to 5 billion? And by the way, I could find that on ChatGPT in a second, so I find it concerning that you wouldn't have those numbers in front of us. I would have anticipated you'd be answering these questions. That money was given to a TV show that dragged in RCMP veterans under a false premise to only humiliate them. I consider that a misappropriation of funds. What does your department consider that?
Maybe two parts to my answer. First is my understanding at this point is that the production has been halted on this one by CBC while they look into it. So that's part one. The part two to my answer is that the system is intentionally built so that my department or the government has no say on programming, specifically to prevent any concerns about government overreach into programming within the public broadcaster. That's the case in Canada. That's the case elsewhere.
Okay, and based on what happened, is there any talks of now having oversight to hand out taxpayer money and having a few more checks and balances in place before funding goes out like that? I understand that you oversee the CBC and the CBC sent out that money. I understand that separation, but it's the Heritage Ministry that really oversees everything. Now, you might have not had a direct hand in that, I agree, but based on what happened and based on now that the RCMP unions this is really a kind of stain on Canadian society, what happened there. Is there talks of having some oversight before that kind of money gets handed out?
I understand the point. I do think there's competing tensions in what you outlined there between protecting the independence of a public broadcaster versus governance choices, which could be made but have been made nowhere in sort of in the world, to have the government play a more direct role in determination of programming. The CBC
not the determination of programming. I understand your answer there, but when something gets funded, I'm assuming it's just not a blank check, correct? And meaning there has to be some checks and balances. Now, we do understand that show, Northern Tales, went under very bad intentions. They fooled everybody. And my question is, have they fooled the CBC? Have they fooled the Heritage Ministry? Like, we can't let that happen again. So I respect your answer, but there should be checks and balances. I mean, this is public accounts, so I'm keeping my line of questioning to the taxpayer dollar.
And to that end, I just want to make sure that we're clear on the lines of accountability. The CBC is independently appropriated, has a board of directors, and an oversight by the CRTC. That is the regime that is in place, and that is the regime that touches on the specifics where you would be asking questions.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, in light of what's happened, the CBC hasn't apologized. You guys oversee the CBC. Has there been any inquiry or apology on your behalf? Like, it's been about a week or two now. What have we seen there? Because there's Canadians out there that are looking for answers, and we just can't pass the buck on this one. Not saying you are, but where are we now?
So, taking a step back, this was a co-production between the CBC and the Indigenous Screen Office, and I'll turn to Joël, who has more details. But specifically, the CBC has informed us that they halted their engagement.
So no apologies have been given, right? There's people here that have been brought in under false pretense, and they were duped. And these are people. These are RCMP officers. These are members of high-ranking members of Canadian society, where they were brought in with fake emails, fake corporations, fake everything, to be duped, and the Canadian taxpayer paid for it. CBC hasn't apologized, and your office hasn't apologized. But there should be an investigation. Is there an apology coming, or is there an investigation that's going to be launched?
I can jump in. So again, my understanding is the CBC has provided statements in the media.
Not an apology. So we'll leave that to them. They're not here. You're here, and your department is here. Your
Mr.
department
Carrick,
oversees it.
You're out of town. Time. Allow Ms. Mamini, if you have a brief statement or a brief comment, you can do that. I'm sure we'll come back to Mr. Carrick later, though. If
I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay.
We'll find some time for you later, Mr. Carrick, to pick that up again. Ms. Shipp, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for coming today. Which community sectors received the largest share of funding in the years that were studied?
Can you
Or
expand by
culture.
community sectors?
Yeah, or cultural. Cultural or community sector received the largest share of funding in the years studied.
Come on, sir.
It would be audiovisual.
Yes, Josie, please.
So in the cultural sector, I would say that it's the audiovisual sector is probably it's the area that receives the most direct support from the government. So we have, for instance, we fund the Canada Media Fund, which is an entity that supports independent production. It's an independent fund that works as well with funds that come from the regulatory kind of contributions of the cable companies. So there's a large fund there that supports audiovisual. We also have, of course, the government also supports Telefilm Canada. So last year, for instance, Telefilm Canada received an increase of $50 million for a total of a budget of $150 million. So within our sector, I would say that the audiovisual sector, which is a large sector and creates significant employment and generates a high level of return on investment in terms of the GDP. So that's the sector that receives the most amount of funding in the cultural sector.
In terms of perhaps smaller funding, like journalism, particularly ethnic media?
At a very high level, if you look at sort of how funding breaks down, and sorry, I have the 25-26 numbers in front of me, but they're roughly proportional if I were to go past a year. So the arts and culture sectors would account for probably around a third of total funding. And then sports, slightly less than that. So if in the year where I'm looking at about $2 billion, you'd have about 430 for creativity in the arts, about 297 for sports, 208 for diversity and inclusion, and then official languages would have accounted for about 600 million. Within that, within the creativity and the arts, the local journalism initiative is one example that you were pointing to, and that would be roughly around $20 million that is directly invested in that. There's also funding for the book fund, the media fund, obviously the audiovisual sector, which would go both through the media fund, but also funding, for example, through TV5. So audiovisual, as part of the arts and cultures, as Joël was mentioning, is probably the largest recipients of our funding, but there's also supports for a number of other cultural and artistic sectors.
Thank you. So just to repeat again, it's 1/3 for audiovisual arts and culture?
I would say arts and culture generally, of the total funding in a year, would be 25% to a third of our funding.
And then there's a smaller amount for sports.
Sports would be, and although there has been, I'm looking at sort of last year, there's been a significant, I've got the more perfect breakdown. So sports would have accounted for 15% of our funding in the 24-25 public accounts period, which you're mentioning. Obviously, there was a significant announcement for sport recently, an injection of 750 million, for the sport system, which is increasing the proportion.
What proportion of funds were directed to local or community initiatives rather than large national organizations? This matters a lot to my riding of Scarborough Aging Court because I have a lot of smaller organizations that really could use funding?
So I would say actually that on average, and we could get you more precise breakdown, but on average our programs tend to target smaller organizations. The average grant size in the department is below 200,000, and a lot of those are in smaller, locally based organizations.
Now, Mr. Brown, you had touched on diversity and inclusion with, I believe it was with Mr. McKinnon's question. Maybe it was inadvertently. However, what investment has been made to the Anti-Racism Secretariat?
Okay, so thank you for the question. And, really there has been, I think one of the pieces of great news was in the spring economic update that announced that there would be a renewal of funding for the multiculturalism and anti-racism program that was otherwise ending at the end of the last fiscal year. And so that was a total of $66 million over 2 years that was announced at that time. And that's going to help us to continue to invest in multiculturalism and anti-racism initiatives across the country. And as you just heard, the vast majority of those involving small community-based organizations. With respect to the Anti-Racism Secretariat, that's also an organization that received some additional funding through the spring economic update. I'm not sure of the exact amount of the funding there, but it was a couple of $1 million is my understanding. It is an organization that was previously with Canadian Heritage and was transferred to Employment and Social Development Canada in 2024, if I've not got the year mistaken. And we are currently working with ESDC with the intent of bringing the Anti-Racism Secretariat back to Canadian Heritage so that it will be once again located more closely with the policy lead on anti-racism work. Their work is continuing. That is the Anti-Racism Secretariat, so to the extent that I'm familiar with some of the work, they have continued some engagement efforts across the country and internal to the federal government as well in terms of bringing a framework of anti-racism to the work that we do every day.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is the time, Ms. Yip. I apologize about that. Suivant, encore une fois, M. Lemire, pour 3 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fascinated today by how all of the Liberal questions are about ethnic matters. There's the promotion of multiculturalism. It's not about living together. It's about funding elements in the community that are about looking inward rather than looking outward and living together in Quebec or throughout Canada. And the department supports this. I heard the term, is it about translation? But ethnic media that are funded by the department in the context in which the government in the budget says it intends to consult in order to maybe put in place a tax credit to support journalism in the regions. We're not even supporting our regional media. It's a disaster. They're all on life support, especially in the regions, especially in Quebec. And funding will be going to ethnic media so that people live in cloistered environments. Is that really the department's vision? When will you be finally funding independent regional media to save the spirit of local news, which is in the interest of everyone?
Les enjeux.
The issues of the health of journalism, it's central to our mission. It's something we look at a lot. There are funding elements that support journalistic initiatives across the country. The department does support regional media and looks at the system more generally with C18. Well, Radio-Canada doesn't have local news since 2018, even though the law says everybody should be represented. So there's a major problem. That's the Crown Corporation. So how would other independent media be managing? They're very vulnerable. There's a sharing of funds where a major Anglophone player got a vast majority of the funding. I have another question about our regional festivals. Increasingly, we see that the department is withdrawing and withdrawing more. The survival and of the diversity and beauty of the regions, its local festivals in villages, they've lost funding in a big way because you think that a local artist has to come from the same region, but artists from Abitibi-Témiscamingue, it's more limited. Drawing crowds means bringing in national artists like those of Quebec, but Quebec to Ottawa is a region, but when it comes to local festivals, they don't think that somebody from Montreal could go and be successful. Festivals have been cut, and the very survival of these important events for tourism is threatened. When will you fund our important cultural events in the regions? To pick up on the first question on journalism, it's necessary to note that the traditional revenue model is struggling because of electronic media, which have changed the business model. That's an issue we are focused on with C18. Regarding local festivals, it is certainly a space where we continue to provide funding. Joël, I think that's under your portfolio. We've invested in Budget 2025 to increase the funding of festivals that are more of local community events, and we invested in the program that's for major festivals like the Jazz Festival and Blues Fest. So there have been investments in Budget 2025 to continue to increase funds, but what you're referring to is the program that supports more community-oriented festivals, and there's a lot of demand for those festivals. And in the breakdown of the funding, some have experienced a decrease in funding. And we know that since COVID, costs have increased as well for a number of organizations. So we're very aware of that. And we're trying to assist as much as possible to continue the vitality of those festivals in the regions, which are very important. So regarding eligibility, to have a local or Canadian artist, depending on the different programs. For bigger festivals, you can have artists from all over, but for the more community-oriented festivals, there's a factor that it has to be a local artist. Briefly, may I ask a written response? Please provide your definition of a rural region so we can understand how that's established in your funding structures, because I have the impression that we're penalized in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Funding went from $700,000 to $200,000 this year for our festival, and that has a big impact on an important event for Abitibi-Témiscamingue and the northeast of Ontario. Thank you.
Mr. Stevenson, you'll have 5 minutes, and then we're going to close with Mr. Ma for 5. You have the floor, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to similar line with my colleague here, Mr. Jetel. I have 7 Indigenous reserves in my beautiful riding of Yellowhead, and I've over the last year started communications with them. But one of the messages that's been clear is that Indigenous languages and culture must be preserved. Especially with some of the results out there that today nearly 70 Indigenous languages are at risk of disappearing. So the report that came out with this conference that had $10 million over 4 days spent is a little bit concerning when there was some reports out there. There was an elder from Norway House that was being paid about $20,000 a year to teach the language, yet the commissioner earns over $216,000, and then directors are earning over $150,000, but the actual frontline people that are actually teaching are making significantly less. So can I'll ask a couple of more general questions to start with. Was the creation of the commission to isolate the government from the decision so that the commission made all the decisions and the government wasn't really responsible for any of those?
The nature of the decision was that in this space, it was important to co-create and work in partnerships with Indigenous communities, that we wanted to avoid a situation where the government was the sole decision maker in a space that is so important for Indigenous communities.
Say this was part of the reconciliation strategy from the languages side of it?
I would.
So when some of this was created as arm's length, it appears to me that there's not really a lot of oversight. Can you maybe tell me what kind of oversight that the department has when it comes to this commission, especially when it's dollars? Because to me it looks like it was a bit of a liberal, as they've done best, to throw money at a problem and let somebody else take the duties and responsibilities on this.
Thank you for the question. And so, as has been mentioned already, it certainly was created as an independent arm's length organization. We do, Canadian Heritage, have two funding agreements with the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. It is about their annual expenses, if you will. It's not about looking inside the organization at the specifics that they are intending. They do provide in advance an annual business plan, which is reviewed, and they also submit their annual reporting.
So earlier, I don't think it was you, but one of the two of you had said that Heritage considers the prudent management of public funds as a consideration as to doing that. So would those that include actually analyzing a budget? Because it doesn't appear, as my other colleagues have talked about, how the money comes out there and you've given them money, but it doesn't appear like you're actually reviewing any sort of budgets. You're leaving that entirely to them, and that's why there's now an investigation because, oh, maybe somebody didn't have a very good budget.
So it is, I think, fair to say that it is that the onus is on the commissioner and the directors in terms of the oversight of the operations of the office, and that it is a very sort of high-level review that we can provide at Canadian Heritage.
So
that's the nature.
So the Heritage Department
agreement.
isn't going to review anything other than their final product after the fact. You're not reviewing anything prior.
Well, I think that's,
you're not saying looking at a budget.
That's a fair assessment. That's
okay.
due to the independence.
So then would it be fair to say that this investigation now would not have even come on your radar if there wasn't a whistleblower?
That is fair to say. We are conducting this because of a whistleblower, and beyond that, we are looking for information so that we can determine whether or not there are issues with the management in that office. At this stage, we do not have evidence that would validate that one way or the other.
A brief question, Mr. Stevenson. Just brief is key, though.
I was just going to ask that it doesn't appear that there's any checks and balances from your end. You've kind of given them a blank check and they run with it. But
Fair to say that independent organizations and the people who are named at the head of them have an accountability to ensure proper oversight and management of those reserves. Fair to say that there are requirements within our grants and contributions that will require some reporting, as Mr. Brown said, but that they are not the same as if it was our own department, and that is by design to ensure some independence and arm's length. And also fair to say that once we learned of potential allegations, that steps were taken.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ma, you have the floor for 5 minutes to close us out with these witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for witnesses being here. My first question would be
what is the key performance indicators for the Canadian heritage?
Okay. As you'll see, they are clearly laid out in the departmental results report, and they are aligned with. If somebody can pull them out, they are aligned with sort of our core mandates. One being around culture and arts and the thriving culture and arts, and my colleague will pull them out. Some around sports, the safety, participation in sports, and the safety of sports. Obviously around the thriving multiculturalism, and so they are aligned to our major project objects. I will see if any of my colleagues are able to pull them out real quick. But they are also reviewed, I will say, regularly as we do our department reports to ensure that they are both meaningful and that they are something that we are able to affect and move over time. And so there are areas where, for example, the vibrancy of journalism, where we have seen sort of a lower number of journalists. At the same time, there are areas where we're seeing significant progress. Indigenous languages has been named multiple times, but that is a space where over the last several years, over 1.4 billion has been invested, and where we've seen some progress and improvements in the vitality and the existence of languages that were, by and large, having difficulty to survive.
In general, do you have set targets for all of these spending in the funded programs? How do you measure that?
Go ahead.
So absolutely, we've got targets. In fact, we've got a lot of targets, which is, I think, one of the challenges that we've got in terms of pulling them out. So, for example, the deputy talked about Indigenous languages, and we, in fact, have specific targets with respect to the number of people in Canada who are able to maintain a conversation in an Indigenous language. This is something that we hope to report on soon as the 2026 census, of course, is underway, and we expect to have some new data to be able to report on that and understand the impact of investments in Indigenous languages as one example. We take a look at other kinds of activities that we've got that we support, rather. For example, festivals, celebrations across the country, Canada Day, for example. And one of the things that we measure is that we're interested in the number of participants, the number of Canadians who are participating in these broad festivals as well, not just those that are perhaps more community specific. We've got specific indicators with respect to official languages as well. So, I mean, we've got the main sort of 5 areas of our programs that were spoken to, and just wanted to mention that we do indeed have specific targets that cut across all of those areas, and certainly one of the things that we're looking at is where are we meeting those targets, where are we having challenges meeting the targets, and how can we improve our programs so that we deliver a better performance for Canadians.
So how have these funded programs contribute to the economic recovery of the cultural sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And as an example and I will say 2 things. Number one, the department's support for the industries, particularly during COVID and its aftermath, was a significant lifeline to the industry that was otherwise very hard hit. Number 2, I would say that with specifics to returning to some of your specifics around examples of targets, one of our targets, for example, is the value of creative exports. And we'd set a target of 20 billion. We're really happy that recently the creative export strategy was renewed and funding made permanent for that program. It is a program that will hopefully allow our creative and cultural industries to export and to thrive both in Canada and more broadly, and drive and contribute to the economic well-being of the country.
Thank you. Similar question to my colleague asked earlier about local community initiative fundings. How do you proportion between local and the large national organizations? Because I know from my writing, a lot of constituents are seniors, and
they're feeling the squeeze because they don't have a lot of income, but they're being turned down by supporting fundings and so forth.
Yes. So we have a multitude of programs in our department, and we also always look to make sure that there's a good balance between supporting local, organizations that create that. And across the department, we have programs doing a number of things, but we always ensure that there's a good balance between supporting whether it's the production of Canadian content, that we do this with different organizations and also large ones, because it's an ecosystem. So we need to have some of the bigger players that can also sometimes have bigger impact on some of the objectives that are pursued in some of these programs, but also there's this kind of local kind of reality with organizations that also contribute significantly to the ecosystem. So I can think of programs on journalism, on again, the audiovisual sector, music, books. We support organizations across different kinds of business models, whether they're quite small. In media organizations, we will fund organizations that have 2 journalists versus very large organizations as well. So,
Thank
The only
you.
thing I would add to that is across every single one of our major pillars and activities, whether it's the creative arts and culture, the heritage celebrations, sports, diversity, inclusion, and official languages, every single one of those pillars will include programs that are targeting local initiatives. Whether it's on official languages through the community life programs, community sports for all on the sports element, local arts and heritage festivals. So each of the pillars have dedicated programming streams aimed at local initiatives.
Thank you. That is the time. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony, for coming in today, for participating in relation to our study of public accounts 2024 and 2025. I'm now going to just suspend this meeting. I want to get moving on the next round of witnesses right away. So thank you again for coming in. I'm going to come back as soon as I can, about a minute, maybe 90 seconds. Thank you. This meeting is suspended. Welcome back, everyone. For our second hour, I'm glad everyone could make it. We have the Bank of Canada in today, the Senior Deputy Governor, Carolyn Rogers. Thank you for coming in today, along with Coralia Bulot, Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer, accompanying the Deputy Governor. There's no opening statement to begin, so I'm going to begin things right away. Mr. Scheer, you've got the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to the committee this morning. Ms. Rogers, you wrote a piece on productivity that I'd just like to ask a few questions on. When I look at the last budget that the government tabled and I see the eye-watering amount of money that Canadian taxpayers have to spend on debt servicing costs, in the last budget it's $59 billion that the government of Canada is going to spend just to pay the interest on the debt. That's more than healthcare right now. It also stands in stark contrast to the commitments of the government made about a year ago, where the deficit would only be about $30 billion. This budget has come in at well over $60 billion worth of deficit. So my question is all that money that's being spent on servicing the debt acting as a drag on productivity? Because that's money that could, if that money came down, if the government had to spend less money on debt servicing, that would free up money for tax cuts, for investments in actual infrastructure. Would you agree that that money spent on debt servicing is having an effect on productivity?
Well, I mean, I think your point that money that is spent on debt servicing could be redirected to other things is accurate.
Okay. The bank also has warned recently, I think it was just a few days ago, that warning about high risk of volatility in the future. When interest rates go up, that also affects the government's debt servicing costs. Do you have any kind of estimates about, if interest rates went up a half a point or a full point, what that would do to the amount the government spends on debt, on servicing that debt?
I don't have that number at my fingertips. No, I mean, we're here today to talk about our own financial statements. So,
okay.
No.
All right. Well, that's I appreciate that. On the financial statements, the bank had announced last year that it was ending the quantitative tightening phase of its settlement management, but it still has about, I think, $150 billion worth of government bonds on its balance sheet. So what is the timeline for normalizing the bank's balance sheet position? Other central banks are trying to get those increases in settlement balances off the books, and the Bank of Canada seems to still be at about $150 billion. So is there a timeline on moving that off, or is that where the bank is comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty well completed the normalization process. I think our balance sheet has kind of settled into a steady state position. Settlement balances will move in relation to a couple of things. They move in relation just to the overall size of the economy. They move in relation to regulatory capital requirements. There's a number of reasons that members of the payment system want to hold higher levels of settlement balances. We're through the balance sheet normalization period, so we think we're probably going to settle in around here. It could move up or down a little bit, but we're pretty well where we think we need to be.
Okay, so about $150 billion will be.
I don't know. What's our actual settlement balance number most recently? We're at that number.
Settlement balances is 74 billion. Settlement balances.
Yeah.
It's what it currently is.
Yeah.
Sorry, sorry, when I say settlement balance, is that, maybe I should clarify, the amount that the bank holds in government bonds?
Yeah.
Would that be closer to 100?
That's a different thing altogether. Do you have that number?
Government bonds is 167 million.
167, okay.
Yeah.
So is that where the bank is going to stay then, at about that?
Well, that moves in relation to money, like the demand for money in the economy. So when we put money into the economy, we offset it with bonds. So that'll move around. But that's about a steady state number for now, at least.
And how does that compare to pre-COVID levels?
Yeah, it's slightly higher. I think
Okay. Just looking over the course of the last month, I know the banks restarted the purchase of Treasury bills back in the fall. When I look at the numbers for the money supply in the last 12 months, and almost, well, every category that I could find on the bank's website, from M1 to M2++, it's all increased substantially, some 6.8, some 6.7, 3.8. We're currently in a position where under this Liberal government, the economy is contracting. So we just saw results out on Friday that Canada is in a recession, that the GDP is actually contracting. The money supply expanding and GDP subtracting. Are you concerned at all about another inflationary period?
I'm a bit confused by your question because you started with the T-bills on our balance sheet. So do you want me to address why?
I'm just observing that some of the decisions the bank has made also correlate, whether it's causation or not, with big increases in the money supply. At the same time,
I think you're conflating two things. So we buy Treasury bills on our balance sheet to balance it. So we need to keep our assets and liabilities in balance. So we'll buy Treasury bills as normal course market operations. Money supply in the economy is a different thing altogether. Money supply is created primarily by commercial banks when they lend. So money supply is going to increase or basically move in response to demand in the economy to a large degree.
But when the bank purchases various forms of government debt, it can also have an impact on the money supply if those institutional banks can lend against.
Yeah, indirectly it can affect money supply.
So I guess that's my observation. Even if we park the discussion on Treasury bills, if we look at all the ways the bank calculates the money supply, it's been increasing over the last 12 months, whereas the economy itself is contracting. And the last time that happened, we had a very significant inflation.
I'm familiar with the theory that some hold about money supply and inflation. I'm happy to dive into what we think caused inflation in the last run-up. We don't think it was money supply, but if your question, I didn't bring money supply data with me because I thought we were here to talk about our financial statements. So we're happy to supply you with the most current numbers on money supply indicators. As you said, they're available on our balance sheet. But
thank you. That is the time. Mr. Ma, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. To begin with, in general terms, what are the most important indicators in the public accounts that parliamentarians should monitor when assessing Canada's long-term fiscal sustainability?
In general, are you talking specifically about our
Well, I do have several specific ones later, but I just start off with a general terms. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you would look at the health of the public accounts like you would another organization. You would look at debt levels and the cost of carrying that debt. You would want to understand what that debt is funding. Is it what type of assets or programs it's funding? Sources of revenue relative to costs, all of the kind of normal things.
Yeah, maybe I'll get into some specifics. So the first one I have is, in terms of debt to GDP, in terms of interest cost and program spending growth and contingent liabilities.
Should those be things you monitor? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And how are we doing in those?
I mean, this is a question for your committee. I'm here to talk about our own financial statements.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So second one is, how does the bank assess Canada's capacity to respond to future shocks if current geopolitical uncertainties persist for several more years?
So how does the bank assess the overall economic ability?
Yeah.
Well,
basically, if this trend continues, how well can Canadians hold up?
Yeah. Well, I'll maybe come back to the speech that Mr. Scheer referenced. One of the ways that Canada could boost its ability to deal with economic shocks is to improve our productivity, productivity can act as a buffer when you experience the kind of shocks that we have been experiencing and that we anticipate are likely to continue or at least not decrease. We're in a quite a bit more volatile world. A lot of the shocks that the Canadian economy is experiencing are coming from outside. They're international, they're geopolitical. Certainly, an economy who has a healthy level of productivity has some room to buffer those types of shocks.
And so what kind of risk are most rapidly eroding that capacity?
Well, business investment is not where it needs to be. That's to be expected in an environment with a degree of uncertainty that businesses are facing right now. Right. There are things we could do to improve our productivity that are really very much within our control. We need to continue to work on some of the barriers to moving labor and goods interprovincially. My colleague, Deputy Governor Vincent, gave a speech about the labor market and the need to make sure that we are training young people for the jobs that are most in demand. So there's a number of things that are very much within our control, but a lot of the shocks that the economy is facing right now are very externally driven. They're very geopolitical.
Right. So then what indicators would signal big concerns for you?
Big concerns about our ability
capacity,
to... Yeah. Well, we would very much like to see the productivity numbers turn around. Okay. If those numbers continue to decline, that would be concerning to us.
So where are we today, and what do you think is the achievable target then?
It's not good today. I mean, our productivity continues to decline. We need to continue to invest in capacity building, some of the education objectives that my colleague talked about. We need to try to convince or create an environment for business investment. I think all of the plans the government is laying out are good plans. There needs to be a sustained focus on implementing some of these plans. The tricky bit really is a lot of these things are going to take time to bear fruit. So there's sort of a lag in terms of how soon you're going to see the results of some of this investment show up in the types of things we watch. Productivity, certainly, it's going to take a while. Things like GDP growth, even our employment numbers. These investments take a while to get traction and really help boost the economy. So,
thank you. So next question is, what economic indicators should the Parliament monitor to determine whether Canada's trade diversification strategy is succeeding? Recognizing you said a lot of these programs will take time.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you how we're thinking about this and how we're trying to get a gauge, and that's just by talking to businesses. Often, what businesses are doing to diversify their trade doesn't really show up in their own numbers for a while, and then by the time it shows up in their numbers, it takes a while to show up in national numbers. So what we're doing to try and gather more real-time data and really understand some of the structural changes in the economy is get out and talk to businesses more.
Right. So looking at that, do you look at the export concentration and investment flows?
Certainly, but that is the
earlier,
so that's the data that will eventually show up in. But okay. I thought your question was, what can we be looking at now to understand the change
now and in the future? You talked about also employment and productivity, and so that's very helpful indeed.
Just one last brief one, Mr. Mock.
Okay.
Please. Yeah, thank you.
So in the budget 2025, with the promises on major investment intended to strengthen productivity, from the bank's perspective, what economic indicator should Parliament monitor over the next 5 years?
There's probably many. I would say business investment would be a really good one. I'd keep my eye on that.
Thank you. Nice, succinct answer. Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for joining us today. We saw last week that Canada is in a technical recession according to the definition that GDP has gone down for 2 quarters consecutively. What actions can the Bank of Canada take to rectify the situation?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. If I may, I will answer in English.
Okay, merci. Let me just maybe talk a little bit about the data and this technical recession label. When there is a lot going on in the economy as there is right now, there's things pulling different data, different parts of the economy in different direction. You're going to get some noise in the data. So I think the first thing I would say is we want to be careful not to sort of over-rotate on any one number, on any one indicator. 2 quarters of annualized contraction in GDP does meet one definition of a recession, but simply the fact that you have to put the term technical in front of it sort of tells you that you need to really look past that one indicator. You need to look at employment. You maybe need to look at some of the more leading indicators. We know, for example, that the flash data on GDP for April, flash is sort of the early warning GDP for April, tells us there's been a bit of a rebound, for example. So I think we need to be careful not to put too much weight in any one indicator. So let me just start there. Your question about what can the bank do to respond to this. I mean, we'll be taking our next decision in just over a week from Wednesday. We'll make our next decision. So we'll be starting our deliberations on that decision later this week. I'm not going to prejudge those deliberations, but we'll be taking in all of the current economic data, including last week's data. We'll have some more data later this week on the labor market. So all of that will be factored in as we think about what our next monetary policy decision is.
Dans une conférence de presse la semaine.
At a press conference last week, you stated that the high price of shares and higher corporate debt, money borrowed by investment funds, are significant risks to Canada, notably because of the economic and geopolitical situation. And regarding youth unemployment, Mr. Vincent said that many people had been unemployed for over 27 weeks. When employers are looking for more experience, that has an impact. One of the levers the Bank of Canada has, and I think you referred to it at the end of your answer, there's the level of the overnight rate. Could the bank review it in the short term?
Well, you mean our policy decision rate? Is that the? Yeah. Well, certainly we will be reviewing it in the short term. We'll be starting deliberations later this week on our next policy rate decision. That decision happens next Wednesday, so we will be deliberating on that in the near term. Just to back up to your other questions, yes, the speech that my colleague gave on youth unemployment did cite that as a concern in the economy. It's not unusual when you see an economic downturn or a slow labor market like we're seeing right now, some of the headwinds that the economy is facing. The youth are usually one of the first groups of people who are hit by a tough labor market, right? They're trying to get their first job, and employers are pulling back on hiring. They put a high premium on experience, and so they maybe won't hire as many new employees. So it's not unusual to see youth unemployment sort of being higher than the overall rate of unemployment, but it is a concern. So we are watching it. As I said, one point that my colleague made in his speech is that we do need to be thinking about whether or not our education programs are setting our youth up for the jobs that are available in our economy. Particularly when our economy is going through a bit of a structural shift, those types of jobs are going to change, and we want to make sure that we're preparing a labor market both for the sake of the economy but also for the sake of the youth that are going to be looking for jobs.
Dernier élément.
A last element, gold reserves were all sold to Canada in 1965. I come from a mining region with gold. Canada had 1,200 tons in its reserves. In 85, Canada started lowering its reserves. The last ounce was sold in 2016. If we still had 1,023 tons of gold, it would be worth $235 billion, which would have an impact clearly on our debt. Will you restart stocking gold so we can have reserves that were very profitable for stabilizing the Canadian economy?
Well, the gold reserves that you're talking about are held in the government's, what's the account called? The Foreign Currency Exchange Fund account. So that is not on the Bank of Canada's balance sheet. That's the government's account. As the fiscal agent, we manage that account for them. We don't make the decisions of what to hold in that account. We make the purchases once the government decides what to hold in that account. More broadly, though, the way I would address your question is the purpose of that account is really to have on hand some liquidity in different currencies, and for something to be liquid, you need to be able to deploy it quickly. Gold doesn't really meet that definition. So I think probably the decision to move out of gold and into actual currencies was probably to make sure that that account is liquid and can serve the purpose that it's there to serve.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Next round of questions, Ms. Kuzi for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bienvenue, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Madame Rogers, I see you have an MBA like myself, but I think you've made better use of yours than mine in being up there than here. And I also see you went to Brandon University, which leads me to believe you might be a Manitoban, like my husband. Very nice, excellent. I'm Albertan, but our two provinces share a strong bond in our household. Last week, you released the Banks and Financial Stability Report, and I wanted to ask you a few questions about that. The report notes that vulnerabilities have increased in some parts of the Canadian financial system, and that a shock or a combination of shocks could cause multiple vulnerabilities to crystallize at once. I haven't heard my colleagues use this term as of yet. Here, this quote, which I think is very good. In your opinion, what would a crystallization of vulnerabilities look like for Canadians, please?
Well, what we worry about is a huge sudden demand for liquidity that would sort of create, well, the term we use is dislocations in core funding markets. So when that happens, the core funding markets that make sure there is liquidity and funding there for all kinds of things in our economy, everything from government funding themselves, rolling over debt, corporations rolling over their debt, making sure there's stability in markets like mortgages and consumer loans and commercial loans. So when you have a very sudden spike in demand for liquidity, what happens is you can get margin calls and investors. In order to meet those margin calls, investors start selling assets. There's more assets available for sale than there are buyers in that type of stressed environment, and you can get very sort of large moves in prices that disrupt markets. So I mean, that's sort of the scenario that we picture when we think of more than one thing going wrong at one time, and then some of these things can sort of interact and feed each other, and you get a bit of a confidence spiral.
Right. I'm very concerned at this at a household level in Alberta. There was actually a report last week that I saw that Calgary, unfortunately, leads the way in non-mortgage consumer debt with an average of $24,500 per household. Shortly behind is Edmonton with $24,000. So I see the trickle-down effect, I believe, that you are referring to. I think it's very easy for these callbacks to domino very quickly back down to Canadians. With that and what you described, how would that affect the bank's decision-making? You talked about next week is a very pivotal point on June 10th, which is approaching in less than 2 weeks. considering these vulnerabilities you discussed, as well as you touched on several factors that the bank will be considering. You referred to employment. Of course, we've seen significant high unemployment rates. I liked what you said about the youth, where we've seen youth having trouble obtaining employment across the country. How do those vulnerabilities affect your decision-making as you go to make this decision for June 10th after these two quarters of negative reporting?
Okay, you jammed a lot in there. So
I apologize, I did, yeah. Because I recognize I have a brief understanding of the complexity of the decision you're making.
Okay. Well, let me just first clarify my first answer. What I thought you were asking me was to imagine the scenario that we said we worried about in the Financial Stability Report, where a number of vulnerabilities sort of crystallized at once, or a number of shocks hit at once, and the economy comes under financial stress. What does that look like? So it's sort of, I mean, unlike the monetary policy report that we publish 4 times a year, we publish our financial stability report once a year, and it's very different. What we try to do in the financial stability report is sort of imagine what's the worst thing that could happen. And we really ask ourselves the question, how prepared are we? Do we have enough resilience built up in the financial system that we could withstand a shock when things started to kind of malfunction, or liquidity would seize up? So that's the purpose of that report. So when I answered your question, I was trying to give you sort of a picture of that stress test that we think about. I think your question is really more around how do we think about the different points of financial stress or vulnerabilities in the economy when we make our monetary policy decisions? Have I interpreted your question correctly?
Yes, I believe they are interrelated, as I believe your answer is indicating.
Well, certainly financial conditions more broadly are always one of the factors that feed into a monetary policy decision. The financial markets are really how we transmit monetary policy. So if they're not functioning properly, then it becomes harder for monetary policy to get traction. Financial markets, if they're under stress, they can be pushing interest rates up, for example, and we might be trying to hold interest rates steady. So it's definitely one of the things that feeds into our monetary policy decision. I think your other question was around, do we think about levels of household debt, and how do those feed into our decisions? Well, certainly that's going to affect how much traction monetary policy has too. So those are definitely things that we're always tracking.
With your deliberation, thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn to Mr. McKinnon, we are expecting the bells to go. As per kind of customs, I'm going to keep working through the first 15, 16 minutes of the bells. I know I've talked with the government members. Is that okay to do that? I'm seeing Mr. Lemia nod as well. So, Ms. Rogers, I think you will get out of here a little early. The bells will go, but I'm just going to keep going, Mr. McKinnon. I won't interrupt you. And then we'll wrap things up at the end of this session. So you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. So I'm not going to approach this with any kind of economic sophistication. I'm a computer programmer. So I'm kind of interested. You on your deck, you indicated that some of the liabilities the bank has is banknotes in circulation. I'm wondering how cryptocurrency factors in there. Do you guys have a role in cryptocurrency? Do you supply cryptocurrency? And I guess what are the consequences? More broadly in having cryptocurrencies out there.
We don't supply cryptocurrency, and there's no cryptocurrency assets on our balance sheet.
Okay.
Your last question, though, so what are the sort of broader implications? Well, cryptocurrency has, for the most part, kind of stayed in the realm of speculative investment. So I sort of think of it as less a currency, as much as it's called a currency, and more of a speculative investment. I would say certainly if cryptocurrency was to grow quite a bit from where it is now, and more importantly, if it was to become a form of payment and it was being used more broadly in the economy, it's possible that could affect the traction of monetary policy because it's sort of a separate form of currency and payment. But we haven't seen it play that role in the economy yet.
So it's kind of a niche element in the economy at this point. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, as I said, I would put it, I think its most clear definition would be that it's a speculative investment asset at this point.
I guess carrying on with this, as we do hopefully more business with Europe, for example, how does the euro affect the value of the euro versus, I guess, the value of the U.S. dollar affect our economic decisions and our economic welfare?
Well, I mean, we deliberately have a floating exchange rate. It's a feature of our monetary policy framework. I mean, if we're doing more trade in euros, then certainly the movements in the euro relative to the Canadian dollar would affect the balance of trade accounts and stuff. But as I said, a floating currency is a feature of our monetary policy decisions. So.
Well, just to belabor this as well, so banknotes in circulation. I mean, people don't use banknotes so much anymore. I don't think I've paid a bill with a Terry Fox bill recently. Everything's electronic. Does that affect the banknotes in circulation and the liabilities of the bank?
Well, in fact, I can see how you would think that, but in fact, lots of people still use cash. 1 in every 5 transactions is still done in cash. We continue to see the demand for notes increase. So we haven't seen a huge drop-off in the demand for banknotes.
Do you see any projection? Do you have any projection on where this is going to go in terms of, currency in circulation and relationship with cryptocurrencies and so forth?
Well, I don't anticipate, again, because cryptocurrencies are really more of an investment than they are a payment vehicle. Okay. I don't expect them, at least in the near term, to have a big effect on the demand for banknotes. Your broader question, I mean, certainly the premise of your question up front is something we've thought a lot about, and as our economy becomes more digital, will we see the demand for banknotes drop off? I think we've thought for a long time we would see that, but as I just said to you, so far, at least, Canadians are still using banknotes for 20% of their transactions. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's my time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Monsieur le ministre, s'il vous plaît, pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Rogers, your deficit is now $9 billion because you bought the debt of Canada during the pandemic. You need 5 years to get back to balance, if and only if we don't go through a new economic crisis, which is far from certain, and the last data give us fear. You are also enriching Canadian banks with $9 billion, not billion. So there are monster profits, and the dividends won't come till 2030. How do you justify your decision when we are going through perhaps a new economic crisis, and you didn't have a deficit in the past? Why, with COVID, does there have to be investments in Canadian banks? Why is it the Bank of Canada and taxpayers paying for this?
So your question is, why do we pay interest on the settlement balances to banks?
Oui, et pourquoi avoir mis de l'avant cette stratégie-là plutôt que des stratégies?
And why do you have this strategy rather than past strategies that didn't lead to debt in Canadian banks?
Okay. I think I understand your question, and I think you're maybe conflating 2 different things. So we have always paid interest on settlement balances. That is not a new strategy. That's not a strategy that changed during COVID. That is how we implement monetary policy. That's basically the overnight rate. We set that rate, and then that is the rate from which other forms of credit are priced in the market. So paying interest on settlement balances is an important part of implementing monetary policy. Your other question, though, is maybe help me understand it. You're asking me, how do I justify the the deficit? Or?
Le fait, puis là, ben, mon
The fact, and my time is running out, but the fact that to resolve the deficit in the context of the pandemic, we bought debt from Canadian banks. When you buy debt, you pay interest, and it's paid to the banks. They're making a profit on COVID debt when the Bank of Canada had a capacity to borrow at nearly no interest at that time. So we are paying interest to big Canadian banks that don't necessarily need that money, rather than the federal government that has huge deficits. Is that the right approach to fund banks through deficits?
Okay. So the losses on our balance sheet stem from the quantitative easing during the pandemic. That was not a funding the bank strategy. That is not what that was. Quantitative easing was a strategy to try and keep the price of long-term debt in the economy low, to try and help stimulate the economy out of an extremely sharp recession that resulted as a result of the pandemic. So it's a very extraordinary monetary policy measure. We haven't taken it in the past. This was the first time the Bank of Canada undertook it. We don't expect to undertake it in the future apart from very extreme circumstances. So that is the source of the deficit that the bank had. It was not us lending money to banks.
Et voilà.
I'm understanding the question.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Mr. Detel, you'll have 3.5 minutes, and then Ms. Yip will close us out for 3.5 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, mesdames, soyez les bienvenus.
Welcome to the witnesses. And then we welcome to the Senior Deputy Governor. You are from Winnipeg, I've seen. Yes. So, Ms. Rogers, you spoke about productivity earlier. In what measure do you assess Canada's productivity? How much does it affect public finances and the Bank of Canada?
Oui, OK. Si vous permettez, OK.
If I may.
Je pourrais être plus clair.
I'll be clearer.
So your question is how do I assess productivity as it affects the country's finances and the bank's finances? Do I understand? Okay. It doesn't have a direct, I'll start with the bank's finances because it's fairly straightforward. It doesn't have a direct effect on, or really any effect on our balance sheet or our income statement. The speech I gave talked about how it affects monetary policy in the sense that an economy that has high productivity can grow faster before it starts to create inflationary pressure. So that means an economy can heat up, it can get going, it can grow quickly, and it's not going to create inflation, which means the bank will not have to sort of intervene to try and damp down the economy to keep demand and supply in balance and make sure that we don't get an inflationary surge that comes with a growth surge. So, as I said to the previous question, it creates this nice buffer in the economy that lets you buffer shocks, lets you buffer sort of surges in growth, and really fends off, it kind of inoculates you against some of the inflationary pressures you get. So that's how we think about productivity in the context of monetary policy decisions. In some sense, it does a lot of the same things for the broader fiscal position of government. It allows the economy to grow. If productivity gains are shared across the economy, it improves the standard of living for everybody. I mean, if you think about it, productivity is fundamentally we create more output per hour of input of labor. So if you're a company and you can create more of whatever you're making for every hour your employees work, your company's going to grow and become more profitable. Same with a country. If a country can create more GDP per hour of labor it has, then the country's wealth will grow, and assuming that wealth is spread broadly across the economy, it helps everyone.
Since I don't have much time left, I have a question out of curiosity. You said earlier that 20% of transactions are done with cash. over the past 30 years, the Bank of Canada abolished the $1,000, the penny, the $1, $2. The penny was abolished, but $1 and $2 became a coin, not paper. So, are there changes to come on the money we use?
Well, we are going to be releasing a new $20 bill later this year with the new monarch on it. And we also have a new $5 bill in production. So
It will not be a coin.
it will not be a coin, it will be a bill. I would say most of the changes and advancements that we're making, for one thing, we do the notes, the Mint does the coins. The advancements and the gains that I think we focus on most now are anti-counterfeiting, making sure that bills are not easy to counterfeit, to make sure that people continue to have confidence. And you talked about getting rid of some of the very large bills. You can imagine small businesses worry if they take a $5 counterfeit note, that's different than taking a $100 counterfeit note. And if you're a counterfeiter, you're always going to counterfeit the big bills. So, but these new notes that are coming out are going to have enhanced counterfeit measures, and overall, the Bank of Canada has an extremely good record on counterfeiting.
Thank you.
Very low parts per
Thank you very
million.
much.
Yeah.
Ms. Ship, you'll close this out. Just so everyone knows, I am watching the clock. We're not voting at the top of the hours, but we're voting at around 1:05. So you do have 3.5 minutes, Ms. Ship. You can use it all or as little as you like. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rogers, you had talked about the importance of increasing productivity and that business investment is required. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, maybe I'll come back to the description I was just using. If a business can produce more with each hour of labor of input it has, it will become more productive. And if we do that en masse in the economy becomes more productive. Often those improvements take a certain amount of investment, whether it's training your employees or buying them different equipment, or it can be in our digital economy, it can be on intellectual property. So business investment that helps a business become more productive will help increase overall productivity.
So would you say that the productivity super deduction and the shred reforms how will that impact government finances?
I think those are examples of trying to incent businesses to make investments.
Okay. You had a chart in your decks talking about asset profile. Why has the asset profile declined in recent years?
Yeah, well, that is, when I was talking to Mr. Scheer earlier, he talked about normalizing our balance sheet. Our balance sheet grew during the pandemic, and once we were through the worst part of the pandemic, we started to normalize it sort of back down to its normal level, smaller.
Okay. And this is my last question, can you update us on the statutory reserve?
I'm sorry.
That is the only reserve available to offset losses.
Oh,
yes. And I was just wondering, there is adequate reserve.
Well, so the Bank of Canada Act prescribes normally the Bank of Canada returns any excess income to the government, and we keep a small portion of equity. I think, I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, statutory reserves. So it hasn't changed, if that's your question.
Okay. All right. We'll just leave it at
Thank
that.
you very much. We do have votes, so I will thank the Bank of Canada for coming in today. I appreciate you coming back again for a second time to help clarify some issues that the committee had. This meeting is adjourned. We'll see you back here on Wednesday. Thank you.